Now to the main event of our afternoon, and that is beginning with an award to our esteemed speaker, our honored guest, Dr. Navi Pillay. This award, this Dean's Medal, has been awarded to a wide variety of people over the years. We tend to give one or at most two in the course of a year. People like Colleen Gale, the president and CEO of CARE USA, Paul Martin, the Prime Minister of Canada, Mahdi Atasari, international negotiator, Nobel Prize Peace winner, Secretary of State John Kerry. Last year on this dais, we gave the award to the head of USAID, Dr. Raj Shah. More in the past, one to Sharon Abadi, human rights lawyer, and another Nobel laureate. So as the Dean of the Fletcher School, it's my honor today, and indeed my deepest privilege, to present this award, the Dean's Medal, to Dr. Navi Pillay. I'll simply say a word about her life and record, if I may, to serve both as an introduction to her remarks and so you can understand why we have chosen Dr. High Commissioner Judge Pillay for this award. She has served with extraordinary distinction throughout her life. She is a widely respected jurist and above all regarded as a human rights advocate and one who has focused through international law, the International Criminal Court, on curtailing violations of human rights and mass atrocities. Navi Pillay was born in poverty, in a poor neighborhood in Durban, South Africa. She's of Indian descent, and through the support of the Indian South African community, she was able to attend the University of Natal, from which she won a bachelor's and her law degree, and then attended Harvard Law School, attaining an LLM as well. She went on then to become the first South African to win a doctorate at Harvard Law School. And in 1967, in South Africa, she became the first non-white woman to open her own law practice. As she said at the time, no law firm would employ me because they said they could not have white employees taking instructions from a colored person. 1967. That was the beginning of a career that has gone on to shake the corners of the earth in human rights. Over the next 28 years as a lawyer in South Africa, she focused, as one would expect, on anti-apartheid. And in 1973, she won the right for the prisoners at Robben Island, the notorious prison where Nelson Mandela, among many others, was incarcerated. She won the right for them, for the first time, to have access to lawyers. She became a member of the Women's National Coalition, contributing to the inclusion in the South African Constitution years later on an equality clause prohibiting discrimination on the grounds of race, religion, gender, sexual orientation. Continue along. When the African National Congress comes to power in 1995, Nelson Mandela, a former prisoner, of course, who had benefited so deeply from Navi Pillay's advocacy, is now, of course, the president. And he appoints her to be the first non-white woman to serve on the High Court, the Supreme Court of South Africa. If all of that was not enough, she's then elected by the United Nations General Assembly to serve as a judge on the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. Rwanda, described by Samantha Powers as the problem from hell. Indeed it was. Navi Pillay, 8 years of her life working on those challenges. And in 2003, she was elected to the first ever panel of judges of the International Criminal Court, where she worked for the next 6 years, working on human dignity, human rights. Above all, she has consistently been a powerful and effective High Commissioner for Human Rights at the United Nations. In the words of her successor, in that job as High Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillay was described as someone who believes deeply and movingly in the centrality of victims and of those who are discriminated against the most. Those are truly inspirational words, I would say, to all of us in the Fletcher community. As I look back on the life of this jurist, this international legal advocate, this United Nations High Commissioner, it strikes me, if I may, that her life personifies the values we seek to embody here at the Fletcher School. Values of human dignity, of the right of all to knowledge, of the right of all to redress in courts, of the right of diplomacy to solve solution. This marvelous woman has lived those values. So it gives me enormous, enormous happiness today, by the power vested in me, officially speaking, by the president of the university and the provost of Tufts University, to award Navi Pillay the Fletcher School's Dean's Medal today. Judge. The floor is yours. Congratulations.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Dean Stavridis, thank you very much for this medal. It's rather heavy, and I will value it. Academic Dean Johnson, distinguished officials and faculty of the Fletcher School and of Tufts University, honored guests, and last but not least, dear graduates, congratulations. I just heard that you are the best school in law and diplomacy. So who did that? Was it a minor contribution from the faculty, maybe? But totally due to the graduation class of 2015, I would say. It gives me great pleasure to join you here today at the Fletcher School for this very special day. Dean Stavridis, thank you for inviting me to share this ceremony with you, and thank you also for doing such a fine job with the weather. I understood that you had snow fairly recently. Or it may be credit to me because I come from Durban, a hot city, as you know. I would like to start firstly by addressing the graduates. You have my enthusiastic congratulations. I wish I was back in your seats to start all over again, because you now have so many advantages that we did not have when we were getting an education. I wish you success in your lives and in the pursuit of your career. Let me pick on what the dean just said. The United States has a good constitution. It stands for values. So does the state of Massachusetts. In my work as High Commissioner for Human Rights, I looked for good practices all over the world. I held up Massachusetts as a state that has a long history of justice, fairness, and therefore I was extremely distressed to hear yesterday's decision of the imposition of a death penalty in the terrorism case. And I truly am distressed because this is a setback for the values and principles set by Massachusetts, which has now been followed by over 150 countries in the world. 150 countries have steadily either abolished the death penalty, declared a moratorium, or withheld the execution of sentences. And of course, I'm here in the United States, which also gave me a great education here in Boston. And I truly appreciate, as I said, the United States' role in helping me as the former High Commissioner for Human Rights in protecting and promoting human rights all over the world. And yet I am concerned that there is a need for the United States to join the international community in the framework of values and principles. Last month, you would have heard that South Sudan, the newest member state of the United Nations, has ratified the Convention on the Rights of Children, of the Child. And now, apart from Somalia and one or two remote Pacific islands, the United States has yet to ratify the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Similarly, it's a matter of concern to me that the United States is one of the few states, together with states like Iran, who has not ratified the Convention for the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. So I salute you today because of your achievement, the education and principles that you have imbibed from this institution, and I urge you then to go out there and make a difference, to continue to care. I am deeply grateful for the efforts made right here in Boston by students. Students in Boston were the first to hold peaceful protests against apartheid in my country. Gradually, that movement spread, and together with the support of the international community, led by President Mandela, we achieved a peaceful revolution to democracy. And this is how we in the developing countries view students such as you. You are really in a position to help us. I am deeply concerned about growing laws that suppress freedom of expression in many parts of the world. NGOs are not allowed to function. They're not allowed to receive funding. Journalists and human rights defenders have been sentenced to huge terms of imprisonment for exercising what you consider as normal, the right of freedom of expression. I know of one blogger, for instance, who was sentenced to 18 years in imprisonment for just expressing a comment that you would think is in the normal course of exercising democracy. So I would say then to you, the class of 2015, the world is in need of bright emerging leaders ready to tackle today's most pressing problems. Let me speak about some of these problems, both here in the United States and in many parts of the world. In my own country, South Africa, we are currently going through an important crisis. You may have read about the xenophobic attacks against immigrants and foreigners by South Africans, and that the Rainbow Nation, as Archbishop Desmond Tutu fondly describes post-apartheid South Africa, could be the place where individuals attack other individuals because they look different or because they do not hold citizenship, has shocked the nation in South Africa. It demonstrates that the hard lessons learned from the past are not enough to prevent the repetition of terrible violations. Violence is cyclical and is much harder to stop than to set in motion. I am currently chairing an official investigation into the violence against immigrants in South Africa, and I left just to come here to salute you at your graduation. But what is occurring in South Africa is part of a much larger phenomenon. Today, anti-immigrant and xenophobic sentiments are high throughout the world. It is not difficult to understand why people blame foreigners for their troubles. High unemployment, rising inequality, and increasingly unaffordable costs of living are among the concerns of citizens everywhere. People have fears, and these fears are exacerbated by extremist elements in our society. The challenges posed by migration cannot simply be solved by shutting frontiers to migrants. The number of international migrants has doubled over the past 25 years, and it is estimated that it will double again by 2030. A repressive policy is not the answer, as the Europeans are learning through really hard lessons. This year, it is estimated that over 36,000 migrants have reached Italy, Greece, and Malta by sea. Deaths at sea this year alone have been 1,750, with a further 1,776 reported missing, including those in the shipwreck on April 19th, which claimed the lives of 800 people. In other words, for every 10 migrants to have reached safe haven, one has died or gone missing, making the journey across the Mediterranean in the last few months alone. An estimated 5,800 migrants were rescued off the Libyan coast only in the last few weeks. So against this background, the issue of migration is increasingly being scrutinized, is increasingly being securitized as if it's a border security issue and not a human rights issue, with governments framing migrants in terms of risk and in terms of threat. Concerns about security lead to harsher treatment of asylum seekers, including extended processing times, and these feed into a broader tendency to label asylum seekers illegal, which can lead to decreased regard for their human rights, to their right to refoulement or non-detention. And international law is clear on detention of migrants, that must be the last resort, not a first response. There should be no routine decision or detention of whole categories of asylum seekers or migrants, and their detention must be subject to judicial review. Child migrants should only be detained as a measure of last resort and for the shortest possible period of time. Yet in the United States alone, it is estimated that more than 300,000 migrant men, women, and children are detained each year, sometimes in jail facilities with barbed wire and cells, along with those serving time for criminal convictions. We have to acknowledge that most of these migrants are desperately trying to reach the United States or Australia. Those crossing the Mediterranean or the boat people are fleeing from Myanmar or Bangladesh. They are all simply searching for better lives for themselves and their families. Often they are looking just for a safe place where they can live in peace and in relative security and not be at the risk of dying because of a barrel bomb, a machete blow, or because they are caught in crossfires. The serious risks they take in undertaking these dangerous journeys show how desperate they are to flee from fear and want. I was looking at the tourist journals, after all I'm here as a tourist, here in Boston, and I see how much Boston is glorified for its immigrant experience. So good values have been set in this province, and that is to value the migrant worker and his or her contribution. Migration is often a courageous, dignity-seeking journey. And so what is troubling to me now is that we are unquestionably denying these courageous individuals and their families the most basic human rights simply because they are not citizens. So I do believe it is time that we recognize that our individual and collective attitudes to the continuing movement of people around the world will largely define our national and international futures. A key part of this process will be to ensure that all migrants are valued for their contribution to society and accorded the necessary rights and also the responsibilities that that implies. So, dear friends, growing up in South Africa under the apartheid regime, I experienced firsthand what was deemed at the time to be respect for the laws and the rule of laws, which included legislation that institutionalized racial discrimination and courts that implemented these laws. Here we have, under the veneer of rule of law, a systematic racial discrimination, as well as other violations of human rights being implemented. And this experience led me to realize that the rule of law, without reference to a set of core values expressed in terms of human rights and fundamental freedoms, is meaningless and could even lead to the possibility of legitimizing a wide range of human rights violations through the prism of legality. And so I'm very encouraged that amongst the graduates, I see that Fletcher School has admitted students from very many parts of the world. So the importance for this, for you, as it was for me, is to be introduced to international standards and principles so that we can ask for remedy where these are absent or there are gaps in our own societies. So the education that Fletcher is offering will have wide-ranging effect on the future of societies across the world. It's interesting to me that in the history of the United States, after the Constitution was first adopted, there was an immediate movement to adopt a Bill of Rights to protect the fundamental freedoms and human rights of its citizens. Although the United States has benefited greatly from its Constitution and its Bill of Rights, and this no doubt has contributed to making it a beacon of liberty in many respects, and from the perspective of the world, the United States has paid dearly for its maintenance of slavery, which led to the American Civil War and the institutionalization of racial segregation that was protected by legislation and the courts until the mid-1950s here. The acceptance of slavery and then institutionalized racial discrimination against a specific part of the United States population for such a long period illustrates how a nation founded on respect for individual liberties can find its values undermined when equal protection of the law, a fundamental human right, is not respected. It is important not to ignore this historical background when considering more recent events in this country, notably in Ferguson and more recently, Baltimore. While the events are tragic, we can be heartened by the extent of peaceful, organized protest and reactions that have occurred across the country and by the government's expression of determination to tackle these issues. There is hope that a new wave of action to advance civil rights and accountability may occur. And speaking of accountability and justice, there is a last challenge that I would like to mention, and it concerns half of humanity, women and girls, and their access to justice. You have a good constitution, but the South African constitution is better because we have the equality clause. And we have used that equality clause to secure economic rights for everyone. We have used that equality clause to bring very important actions by the government to protect women and girls against domestic violence. So I do hope that you will get your ERA amendment soon. And of course, I readily acknowledge that there has been such great improvement over the years in the crucial area of human rights for women. We in the developing countries benefited from your actions and strategies. But the picture is far from perfect. In over 50 countries, there is no legal protection for women against domestic violence. Here, yet 1 in 3 women experiences physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. Where are they expected to obtain redress and justice? Now, other issues are concerning. 1 girl in 3 is married off, and I'm now reverting to the world. 1 in 3 married off, either into early marriage or forced marriage, while still a child. So-called honor killings are shockingly frequent. While the efforts to combat female genital mutilation have seen some success in terms of legal reforms, 60 million girls in the world have been genitally mutilated. Because the health of women is not often a priority, hundreds of thousands of women and girls continue to die every year from preventable causes related to childbearing, and gender stereotypes continue to compromise women's enjoyment of rights all over the world. I don't have much time, but let me recount to you a visit I made as High Commissioner to the state of Jonglei in South Sudan. I know that some of you are serving as interns. I encourage you to serve your internships with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. So I found one of my staff then, plus 1 intern, working in this remote area of Jonglei amongst the women. This area is totally cut off by the Nile waters, and the only way in which we got access is by a UN helicopter. I found then a group of women sitting under the trees. They came from different tribes. They spoke different languages, but colleagues from my office had managed to get them together to engage in a dialogue. 2 of the women told me that their 12-year-old daughters had been killed by the fathers and brothers because the father had arranged marriages in exchange for cattle. Cattle was an important source of wealth and also the cause of tribal wars in that area, with the marriages to very old men. And these 12-year-olds had refused to go along with that arranged marriage. They were then killed, and the one mother said, "I know where my child's body is buried, in the backyard. I've tried to go to the police, but nothing has happened." And they asked me, do we have any rights as women? We had this discussion. I explained their rights. It's something that all of us take for granted. You have the benefit of education. They don't. I was also appalled that the women were deeply scarred. They were branded on their foreheads, like cattle are branded, to show that they belong to this tribe or the other. Their 4 front teeth had been extracted, once again to show that they're the property of a certain tribe. And of course, I left feeling a sense of hopelessness. But a few months later, the ambassador of South Sudan came to see me in Geneva, and he laughed and he said, something has happened that has never happened before, that these group of women from Jonglei State got together, went and saw the governor and said, we want our human rights. So, dear friends, let's remind ourselves that human rights are for all humans, not only for one sex or gender, not for one race or another. Human rights are for each and everyone, irrespective of any identity market, be it religion, gender, sexual orientation, or citizenship. And today's real challenges care little for the boundaries between humans and for the borders drawn by them. These boundaries and borders are inconsequential for the biggest challenges we need to address, such as the Ebola pandemic sadly demonstrated. The real weapons to address this is education, respect for the rule of law, democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of opinion, freedom of press, and of course, all these freedoms should also be scrupulously respected, not only in the real world, but also in the digital world and in cyberspace. The scourges that I just mentioned can only be ended if we know not only what we are fighting against, but also what we are fighting for. And the answer for me lies in the inherent value of human life, every human life, irrespective of race, gender, religion, and citizenship. And as you collect your well-earned degrees today and embark on a new career, may I urge you to consider moving to a different country, assume new responsibilities, and have a life in which you take pride for being a member of the many different communities. That's your own family, the Fletcher family, of course, and many other families and communities. And last but not least, the international community made of all the people of the world. May the defense of the values that underpin our common humanity inspire your many future achievements. It will be your integrity of purpose, your humanity that will make a positive impact on this troubled but beautiful world. Thank you very much once again for this award.